Hello, my name is Melissa Struck, and I'm the ESL Marketing Manager for North America at Cambridge University Press. Thank you all for taking the time to join our webinar today, titled A New Look at Reading and Writing in Advanced ESL Classes. The presenters are Ventures authors Lynn Savage, Donna Price, and Sylvia Ramirez. They will be discussing key principles of the College and Career Readiness Standards for Adult Education in relation to new extended reading worksheets developed for the highest level of the Ventures series, which is Transitions, and now available on the Ventures Online Teachers Resource Room. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Lynn Savage.
Good morning. I'm Lynn, one of the 3 Ventures authors that will be on the panel today. We've divided the session today into 5 parts. The opening is a brief overview of what we have in store for you and a poll so we learn a little bit about you before we begin the meat of the session. The 3 middle sections are the meat: text worth reading, which I'll be presenting, questions worth answering, which Donna will be sharing, and work worth doing, which Sylvia will focus on. Then we'll have the closing. Sylvia will do the closing, and it will include a summary of what the key features are in the new product for Ventures, and it will also include an opportunity for you to reflect on your experience. We'd like to know something about you before we begin. To do that, we've put together a poll. There are 4 questions. For each question, you will choose one from several possibilities. When you complete one, move to the next question. You will need to scroll down the screen to see all 4 questions. After you have finished all 4, please click Submit. You will have about 1 minute to complete. Do you see the questions on the right-hand side of your screen under the question and answer box? The first question is about why you registered for the webinar, and you have several choices. The second question is about your experience with advanced ESL, and again, you have several choices. The third is about your familiarity with the College and Career Readiness Standards, and you have several choices. And the fourth is about your familiarity with Ventures, and again, you have several choices. Please click Submit after you have selected one choice from each of the 4 questions. No matter which of your reasons, we believe that there will be much that is applicable to you. Whether you want to use the materials we've created for use in your classroom, or whether you just want to refer to them when you develop your own materials. I see that most of you are here for more than one reason. So we will be sharing the materials, and we will be providing some background on why we developed the materials. There's a bibliography in your handouts this morning. You've received several handouts, and during our presentation, we'll be referring to the bibliography from time to time so that you will know where we got the information from. If you did not get the handouts this morning, they will be posted when Melissa posts the webinar also. This webinar, titled The New Look, is called The New Look for 2 reasons. One is the anticipated changes in instruction as a result of the College and Career Readiness Standards. The other is a new product, a Ventures product that is extended reading worksheets to expand on the readings that are in the highest level of the Ventures series. What you see on the screen are bullets related to the areas that we will be covering today. The first is complex texts. The second is an emphasis on academic vocabulary. And on the next slide, we see 3 more bullets, one about text-dependent questions, and one about academic language practice, and one about culminating writing activities. By the end of the session, we hope that you will feel very knowledgeable about all 5 areas. Each of the 3 webinar sections will follow the same format. Each of us will give you a little background information on the College and Career Readiness standards as they relate to what we will be sharing with you in terms of the materials. Then we will provide examples from the worksheets that we've developed that reinforce the skills that the College and Career Readiness standards are saying our students need. And finally, we'll give you an opportunity to do something with the materials so that you can dig deep, as the College and Career Readiness standards say our students should be doing when they do text. So, now that we've finished what we have in store for you, we'll start the first major chunk of information, texts worth reading. To kick this off, we'd like to start with a little brainstorming. What you see on the screen is a question. What makes text complex? I know we all have our own ideas about that, and you will see a question and answer box, and you will be typing those things in the question and answer box. Just brainstorm with yourself anything you think of that makes text complex. You'll have about a minute for this. Well, I know that you could probably go on for a few more minutes, but we won't take the time. I see that a lot of you have identified vocabulary, especially academic vocabulary. Some of you have identified sentence structure. Some of you even talked about ambivalent references. We will talk a little bit more about this later in this part of the session. What we're going to do in this part of the session is these 3 objectives. We're going to look at the key elements of the key instructional shift number 1, complexity. We will talk about why this is so important for our learners. We'll look at different aspects that make text complex. And finally, we'll review strategies to help students with complex text. The first key shift is complexity. All the reading anchors in the College and Career Readiness standards address this. They say, apply this standard to texts of appropriate complexity as outlined in Reading Anchor 10. Note that the phrase in the first box says regular practice. This is important if our students are going to become comfortable with complex text. It also says informational text. I know we've all been dealing with informational text, but frequently there are life skills readings, not narrative format. And with text complexity, we're looking more at narrative format. Why is text complexity so important for our learners? There are a couple of pieces of research that answer that question. One is that the ability to navigate complex text is the greatest indicator of success in both college and careers. The other is the gap between the text that high school students are required to read and the text that they encounter in college. In fact, research says it's a 4-year gap. If this is true for students graduating from high school, think about what it means for our immigrant adult students. Now, back to our brainstorming about text complexity. You see on the screen a graphic that shows 3 different elements for text complexity. The first is quantitative, aspects of a text that a computer can measure. Computers can measure word frequency. They can also measure sentence length. They can also measure number of words from the academic word list. There are several different computer programs that measure text. You can find the names of specific tools in the first reference in your bibliography that you should have received this morning when you got your reminder. A description of each of those tools is in Appendix H of the College and Career Readiness Standards document, which you can find online. As we develop the readings for ventures, we use one of these tools to confirm that the readings are in Band D. Band D is the level of the College of Career Readiness Standards that are deemed to be appropriate for advanced ESL learners, as identified by a preliminary study from CASAS. The second key feature is determining about text complexity is the qualitative element. Qualitative are the features best judged by human evaluation. These features fall into 4 categories. You'll see the 4 categories on this slide, the ones in beige, the first being structure, the second language, the third knowledge demands, and the fourth purpose. Regarding structure, notice that structure here is referring to the structure of the text as a whole. It is not referring to sentence structure as in simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences. I think as ESL teachers, we need to be especially cautious about that. Sentence structure comes under language, not structure. Explicit organization, such as chronological, sequential, and narrative, is usually less complex, and that is also related to structure. Graphics, such as tables, charts, and illustrations, make text less complex if they are related to the information that's in the text. Then when we think about language, I think this is the easiest one for us as language teachers. We understand the language aspect. We usually avoid abstract and figurative language. We've developed skills in simplifying text by breaking complex sentences into simple sentences. We've also familiarized ourselves with resources such as different word lists, which help us control the vocabulary of the things we write or help us predict what problems our learners are going to have. As an ESL teacher, we've been taught that students should have listening and speaking practice with the language before they consider it in reading. Now we have a new challenge. We need to somewhat unlearn what we've been learning. We need to learn how to make text more complex and to help our students understand that complexity. We need to have our students encounter new information and they read, not just vocabulary and language structures that they've been practicing in their oral practice. And this is one of the things that we need to be cautious about as we deal with text complexity. Here are some general, the third area is professional judgment, what the instructor does to help students read and understand the text. What they do may come from the instructor, the activity does, or it may also come from the learners and from the materials. And what we're going to do is look at some materials that show you the kinds of interactions that students should have with text complexity. Here are some general elements or some general statements that we need to consider in order to help students with complex text. They need to build their skills in complex text in this way. They need to have accessible and appropriate text. They need to develop reading strategies appropriate to the text, and they need to provide more than one reading on the same topic. That relates to bundling. If you have more than one reading on the same topic, then you get new information as you go to new readings. We'll look at the different strategies to help build the skills students will need to understand complex text on their own. The examples of the activities through three categories that you see on this slide are materials from the New Ventures Transitions Extended Reading Worksheets. You'll find these in the 4-page handout of Unit 6, which you received this morning with your confirmation. The first page of that handout has the reading, Making the Best of Small Talk. Here is the example for a reading tip. You see the title for the reading, and above the reading, you see the reading tip. The tips provide an activity to do before reading the entire article. This tip focuses on text structure. Students read the first paragraph to identify the focus of the article and the last paragraph to identify the key supporting points. This way they recognize that frequently the beginning of a reading gives you the focus and the end of the reading gives you a summarization. Each new reading in extended reading worksheets begins with a reading tip. Some other tips that you'll find in other units are skim each paragraph to identify the focus or purpose of the paragraph, or read the first and last paragraphs to identify the author's point of view. Another one, read the first paragraph to identify who the article is for. That's the first strategy, provide reading tips. The next strategy is building vocabulary. It is key to Language Anchor Standard number 4. The College and Career Readiness Standards have anchors in reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language. This is from the Language Standard, and it reads, students should be able to clarify the meaning of unknown words and phrases by using context clues, analyzing meaningful word parts, and consulting general and specialized reference materials as appropriate. The example you see on this slide is from page 2 in the Unit 6 handout, and it's exercise 2A. What you'll see in the left-hand column is vocabulary words that appear in the text that the students have read. After the vocabulary word, you will see the paragraph sign and a number. It tells the students where in the text they will find the word. We want students to go back to the text, not just to use memory. This particular clue is related to context clues. You'll see that when they go back into the reading for superficial, they'll find that people may have negative reactions. Other examples of strategies for building vocabulary include transition words. For example, find the transitions that connect two ideas. Is the purpose to add an idea or to contrast an idea? Another example of a vocabulary strategy is to select from several definitions of words with multiple meanings, the meaning that is used in the context of the article. Again, notice they can't just select a meaning. All the meanings are correct. They have to go back to the article to select the one that matches the way the word is used in the article. The third and last specific strategy we'll focus on is in this section, calling out academic vocabulary. One of you in the brainstorming noted that the number of academic vocabulary does increase text complexity. And what we need to do is have our students become aware of the academic vocabulary, comfortable with it, and able to use it. This language anchor is Language Anchor Standard 6, which says students need to acquire and use accurately a range of general academic and domain-specific words and phrases for reading, writing, speaking, and listening. This example comes from Unit 6. It's exercise 2B on the second page of that handout. You'll see 5 columns in this exercise. Students see the word, they find the phrase from the reading where the word is used, then they identify the part of speech, they go to a reference for a dictionary definition, and then they use the word in their own sentence. The goal here is to move from recognizing and identifying to students owning the words. Why are academic words important? The more academic words in a reading, the more complex the text. We want our students to be comfortable with academic words. And academic words are ones that cross different domains. They are common in all academic texts across disciplines. And here you see the anchor standard that this came from. So to review, the College and Career Readiness standards have a key shift, which is complexity. And what that key shift says is we need to expose our learners to text complexity. We looked at three aspects of text complexity: quantitative, qualitative, and professional judgment. And finally, we looked at general and specific strategies to help students with complex text. Our next section is questions worth answering, and Donna will be the provider of information on this section.
Hi, everybody. This is Donna. Lynn has just described some important characteristics of text complexity. Now we're going to discuss the second shift in the College and Career Readiness standards, textual evidence, and how it relates to reading and comprehension questions. And this happens to be my favorite shift. The objectives for this section of the webinar are to identify the College and Career Readiness Standard Instructional Shift Textual Evidence. In addition, you will be given an opportunity to distinguish between text-dependent and non-text-dependent questions, and you will be able to identify different types of text-dependent questions. And finally, you will recognize academic language to cite evidence. The second instructional shift in the College and Career Readiness Standards states that reading, writing, and speaking are grounded in evidence from text. As you may know, there are 10 anchor standards in the Reading College and Career Readiness Standards, and anchor number 1 states that students will read closely to determine what the text says and cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking. Most college and workplace writing requires evidence. There is a shift from personal opinion questions like, "What do you think?" to an emphasis on informed opinions based on evidence. Often in ESL, we move from the text, then do comprehension questions about the text, to asking our students how they feel about the text. We need to ensure that our students are answering text-dependent questions that require more evidence-based comprehension before they say or write their own opinions. This actually levels the learning because all students are using the same information to provide their answers. It also helps them be more proficient users of information in their daily lives. Good text-dependent questions are key to building knowledge from content-rich text. These types of questions require students to dig deeply in the material to get the information they need to understand the text. Text-dependent questions will point students toward parts of the text most important to pay attention to. What is a text-dependent question? Text-dependent questions make the text the expert, and the question can only be answered from the text you are reading. It levels the playing field for all learners, not giving advantage to learners with more knowledge about or personal experience with a certain topic. Text-dependent questions are major forms of support for students. They require readers to dig deep into the text to find the answers. They point to the parts of the text that matter most, and they help learners with the language and mechanics of the text. On page 2 of the Transitions Extended worksheets that you have, we ask comprehension questions, but make sure that they are all text-dependent. The reader has to have read the text carefully and will need to go back to the text to get the answers to the questions. On page 3, we continue to ask text-dependent questions that require students to analyze the 3 texts, 2 in the Transition Student Book and the Extended Reading Worksheet we are featuring today that you have. Notice on the left-hand side of this slide are non-text dependent questions that go with the article that you have on page 1 on Smalltalk. These are opinion questions. Students don't necessarily even need to read the article to answer the questions. Some students wouldn't be able to answer the questions on the left because they might not have an opinion about Smalltalk or know enough about it to talk about it. On the right are text-dependent questions. These questions require students to have read the article and go back to it and get evidence to answer the questions. These text-dependent questions on the right require students to pay attention to the text and to draw evidence from that text. So what does that look like in the classroom? Well, first of all, teachers should insist that classroom experiences stay deeply connected to the text on the page, and that students develop habits for making arguments based on the evidence in the text, both in conversation and in writing. And also, students should have a rich and rigorous conversation and develop writing that is dependent on a common text. Here are 6 categories of text-dependent questions taken from Fisher and Frey. In this webinar, we are going to focus on the 3 categories on the bottom of the slide: general understanding, key details, and vocabulary text structure, because these types are consistently used in all of the Cambridge extended readings. Let's look at the first category of text-dependent questions, general understanding. These questions ask about the gist or the main idea of the text. We want our learners to have a general understanding of main ideas or themes of an article. Here are some sample questions we might use to ask about general understanding. What is the focus of the article? What is the main idea of the text? What is this article about? We want students to identify the key details that support the main ideas and themes. These are questions that often can be answered by WH questions like who, when, and how. Text-dependent questions also ask about vocabulary and structure. Academic words are more likely to be abstract and will need as much attention as you can provide. These words are also the ones that students are likely to encounter over and over again. You can get the academic word list at the link provided in our bibliography. Focus on academic words, word families, and words that are abstract. Analyze the structure of text, including how specific sentences, paragraphs, and other larger portions of the text relate to each other and the whole. Let's look at some of the questions on page 2, exercise 1, to decide if they are asking about general understanding, detail, or vocabulary and structure. The first question, according to the article, what should people who initiate small talk consider? What kind of question do you think this is? General understanding, detail, or vocabulary? Of course, you haven't had time to read the article closely, so I'll help you with this one. This is a general understanding question because it requires students to comprehend the gist, the central idea of the text. Okay, so now we're going to do a little poll where you click on the answer if you think the question is asking about general understanding, key details, or vocabulary and structure. So the question is, this one comes from page 3, question number 4. All 3 texts provide suggestions for how to deal with small talk issues. Provide 1 suggestion from each of the 3 texts. So we're going to open the poll now. You have a couple of seconds to answer your question. Okay, well, this might be a little hard because it's not always evident what the question is asking, but if you had more time, you probably would agree that the text-dependent question is asking about key details. The question is asking to give an example of how to deal with small talk issues from all 3 articles. This is an example of providing key details. It answers the question how, and it asks to give specific details that support the main idea, which is that we need to consider many things when we make small talk. I see most of you agreed that it was too detailed. Okay, let's try another poll question. Now we're on page 2 now in your handout, and here's the question on the screen. It's number 5. In the 4th paragraph, which word means to go beyond something? So we open the poll. We're going to open the poll now and click on your answer. Well, I think most of you got that the text-dependent question is vocabulary. The question is asking about a vocabulary word, and the students have to go back and look at the paragraph. They can't just answer it without looking. So let's move on to academic language. Let's say you've been practicing text-dependent questions with your students, and they're getting pretty good at getting evidence from the text they read. What can we do as teachers to promote academic discourse and discussion in a more formal way? One thing we can do is teach academic phrases and integrate these phrases in the activities we do with our students. In the College and Career Readiness Standards, there are 6 speaking and listening standards. In Anchor Standard 1, the speaking listening standard is that students will participate in a range of conversations and collaborations with different partners expressing themselves clearly and persuasively. This is a picture of my students discussing a reading. You can see the phrases to cite evidence poster on the wall. Students use those expressions when collaborating. I have posters hanging on my wall of academic phrases that I refer to when students work in pairs or groups. As a part of the lesson, group students review the academic language phrases beginning to state their points of view, before beginning to state their points of view. I refer to this poster when I have students working together to cite evidence about an article they read. On the last exercise on page 2 of the worksheets you have, you'll see text-dependent questions and the academic phrases to cite evidence that students should use to form the answers to these questions. Students sit together and ask and answer these questions about the text using academic phrases to cite evidence from the text. I've talked about textual evidence using text-dependent questions and described 3 types of text-dependent questions. I've also given a rationale and some examples of academic language for students to use when they are citing evidence from text. Sylvia is going to talk about work worth doing.
Hi, this is Sylvia, and if you notice here, even Teddy Roosevelt agrees that our students should have work worth doing. In 1906, in his Square Deal speech, he said, "Far and away the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing." Of course, he probably wasn't thinking about our work and our students, but current research indicates that students need to raise their skill levels in life and work to live in our more complex world. Our students need and demand work worth doing as they develop these important academic and career skills. So in this section, we'll examine the 3rd CCRS instructional shift, building knowledge. We'll also see how carefully constructed culminating writing activities can promote student analysis and synthesis of new information. So CCRS, and this shift in particular, emphasize the use of content-rich nonfiction texts. Let's take a moment to consider why. The vast majority of required reading in college and at work is informational text, and it's more difficult for many students to comprehend than narrative text. Why is that? Research has shown that readers tend to read fictional narrative text from beginning to end and at a steady pace. In contrast, we read informational text more selectively. We may look at paragraphs or sections that interest us. We might scan for information to answer questions and then go back and read the text in its entirety. The pacing is usually different too. When we read informational text, skimming more parts and some parts and reading other parts more slowly and carefully. Our students need exposure to and strategies for reading informational text. So we do this by focusing on content-rich informational text and exposing our students to different text types and strategies, and to provide coherent selections of strategically organized text so students can build knowledge. And this is, you see this here in CCR Reading Anchor 9. One way to build knowledge is by providing culminating activities. Students need to do something meaningful with the new insights, understandings that they have gained. All of our extended reading worksheets have culminating writing assignments. These culminating writing assignments, of course, improve students' ability to write, but they also strengthen students' comprehension of the material. And students must use evidence to complete the culminating writing assignment. The level appropriate standard, the specific standard for Reading Anchor 9, which is appropriate for our advanced students, states, analyze a case in which two or more texts provide conflicting information on the same topic, identifying where the texts disagree on matters of fact or interpretation. Remember when Lynn talked about text complexity and highlighted the two readings in the student book and also the new extended reading? In all these three texts, the students read about, in this particular Unit 6, cultural problems relating to understanding and using small talk. This is the unit that you have. And then they also find some strategies to use small talk more effectively. That's in the student book. In the new extended reading worksheet, it focuses on whether or not using small talk is even a good idea and provides an opposing viewpoint for the use of small talk. If you're selecting your own text, think about strategically sequencing text on the same topic that will help your students build knowledge. And it's even better if you can find a text with an opposing point of view. As Donna pointed out in Section 2, we have text-dependent questions that not only require students to engage with the text and gain a deeper understanding, but also on page 3, we have questions that require them to look across more than one text to analyze, compare and contrast different points of view, and synthesize information. In this slide, the highlighted text titles show you how students are asked to analyze all three texts. Questions about small talk problems are highlighted in yellow, strategies for successful small talk in blue, and making the best of small talk in magenta. Each extended reading worksheet provides a culminating writing prompt. Here's that writing prompt from Unit 6, telling them that after they read about Miguel, they must form an opinion about the use of small talk. They have to come up with 3 key arguments and evidence to support their opinion. Of course, it's great to have a carefully constructed writing prompt, but if your students are like mine, they need much more support to be able to write an effective paragraph or essay. Take a few minutes and write your ideas of what students may need to be more effective writers. As you did with Lynn, record your answers by opening the Q&A panel, if it's not open now, and write in the text box. And I'll be looking to see what you're writing there. Okay, I see they need the vocabulary to write with. That's step-by-step, the writing process, outlines, comprehension skills, structural models. Yes, great ideas coming in here. They need to know how to use evidence without plagiarizing good ones. And most of what you're typing in now comes under what we call the carefully considered writing process. The process approach to writing is extremely important. Our students need to know that you don't just put words on paper and you're done. It involves thinking about the topic, reading, researching, developing your ideas, then writing multiple drafts, which are revised by teachers, peers, and self-edited, not in that order. And after multiple revisions, the writing shared through reading, posting on the wall, published in some form, so it's clear to students that their writing is for an audience. Our extended reading worksheets address the writing process with before you write, and after you write activities. Here you see the before you write activity that tells students to look at their answers in exercises 1 through 4 and evidence from the 3 texts to form their 3 key arguments. And you see an abbreviated graphic organizer. And then on page 4 for each unit, there's a full-page graphic organizer. This is the graphic organizer for the opinion prompt. We probably all have our favorite graphic organizers, but it's really important to think about how to use them thoughtfully and intentionally. I used to think that students understood that the information they put in the graphic organizer was the precursor to writing their first draft. That is until I reviewed several papers where students had carefully completed a graphic organizer with appropriate information to build a solid paper. However, the draft they wrote contained almost none of the information that was included in the graphic organizer. I was dismayed to learn that many of my students felt that if they put information in the graphic organizer, they couldn't reuse that same information to write the draft. Now, I always spend time teaching the how and why of the graphic organizer, not just the what. And of course, the writing process emphasizes the importance of multiple drafts based on self-editing, peer editing, and teacher suggestions. This after you write activity assists students in this process. Here is where the same graphic organizer becomes a very useful tool. Students have a difficult time giving meaningful feedback to each other. They want to say good, okay, or some other non-helpful comment to get the peer editing part over with. However, if you give them a blank copy of the same graphic organizer that they use to write their draft, they can complete the organizer using the information from their partner's paper. Then it's easier to make concrete comments such as, I can only find 2 arguments, or can you help me find the evidence in this argument? One other way I have found graphic organizers to be extremely useful is when I'm giving feedback to students about their initial drafts. You know those papers where you look at them and say, oh dear, I'm not even sure this student is doing the right assignment? Now I search for something, anything, that will work as one of the arguments, evidence, or opinion, using the student's words and begin filling in the graphic organizer. Students more visually identify what they have and what they need to add. And I'm not using my words to rewrite their paper. I'm working with their words. So now let's take a minute and look at the third handout that you received. It's a 3-page handout that is an overview of these extended reading worksheets. The first page is called Ventress Transitions Extended Reading Content. Don't worry if you didn't get these downloaded or for some reason you don't have them. They will be posted on the website with the webinar. But if you're looking at it, in the left-hand column are the titles of the 10 extended texts, and in the middle column are the related texts in the students' books. In the right-hand column, you'll see the culminating writing prompts, and we have opinion, problem solution, compare, contrast, and persuade writing prompts. Remember that these prompts are supported by the answers to text-dependent questions, so students use evidence from the text. Now, of the same document, if you look at pages 2 and 3 of the overview, these 2 pages are called Ventures, Transitions, Extended Reading, Language Development. And again, we'll look across them. In the left-hand column, you see the 10 distinct reading tips. And the reading tips are very important to build students' skills in comprehending complex text. Often this tip helps students answer specific text-dependent questions too. In the middle column are the vocabulary building activities. These are on page 2 of the extended reading worksheets. They include reading from context, transitional phrases, figurative language, multiple meaning, and there's also the academic vocabulary activities that Lynn mentioned and Donna mentioned too. These are using words from the academic word list, but they're selecting words that are meaningful to understanding the text. They ask the students to find the word in context, identify the part of speech, and then use the word in a new sentence. The third column highlights useful language. This is the section that's helping our students build academic language for classroom discussions. Students practice how to report ideas, cite evidence, cite examples, identify a source, and define problems and solutions. And don't forget, on page 4, there's always an appropriate graphic organizer for the culminating activity. So, you might be wondering, where can I find all these wonderful extended reading worksheets? Well, they're now available online, and you see the URL on this slide. And be sure when you go there to refine your search to Level 5 Transitions, Resource Type, Extended Reading Worksheets. If you're a Ventures Transitions adopter, you have 40 additional pages for the book that are closely tied to the CCRS instructional shifts. If not, well, we wish you were, but you still have pages 1 and 2 that provide a complex informational text on an interesting topic with appropriate TDQs and vocabulary building activities. Your students will also get meaningful practice using academic language. You can adapt the culminating writing prompt on page 3 based on the additional text you select to build knowledge. We hope you enjoy them. In our final minutes, could you take a minute and reflect in the Q&A box that you just used before? Think about one idea or strategy from today's webinar and describe how it may change your thinking or impact your teaching. To record your answer, you need to do what you did before. Open the Q&A panel if it's not open and write in the text box. And I'll call out some of the things that are there. Thank you. I see some people starting to type, and we appreciate it. Okay, good comments about text complexity. And they liked the way that there was questions that could synthesize the 3 texts and spending more time answering text-dependent questions. Good. People were thinking about how to use the graphic organizer more and thinking about the types of questions you're asking students and comparing texts, showing different points of view. Oh gosh, these are great things. I love using the graphic organizer. I do too. I got that idea from Parrish and Johnson, and I've never forgotten it. And for close reading, and the handouts with the academic words phrase from articles. Oh gosh, teaching vocabulary in context and making it meaningful for the students' assignment. More comments about the graphic organizer. We really appreciate your comments, and we're glad that you found some things to think about more deeply in your teaching. And the reading tips, good. Focus on the reading tips and how they can be used every day, because reading tips are just great. It's not only for the text, but for different texts. So now it's your turn. We'd like to give you an opportunity in our last minutes together to ask us some questions. If we don't get your question answered, we promise that we will provide an answer to you. But let's go ahead and try to answer some of the questions that come into us. And I see people are typing, so, okay. Oh, okay, great. What do you suggest for learners who may not have the patience to read multiple texts about the same topic, but get bored with less complex units? Well, I'm really glad you asked that, because one of the things, when you're thinking about building knowledge and layering text, you don't always have to think of it in form of 3 texts. Let's, for example, in your classroom, you were thinking about urban sprawl and the problems of your students were talking about not having enough parks and not having enough open spaces. So you might start with a complex visual, not just a visual of a couple people, but something maybe with a rundown park scene or crowded people in one situation to generate lots of academic language. Remember to think about classroom discussion. Then they could read one text that's on urban sprawl and about the loss of parks and open spaces. And then from my generation, there's a great song by Joni Mitchell about the big yellow taxi, about chopping down trees and turning everything into parking lots. I just listened to that last night, and it's a great way. So your students could listen to a song, discuss the picture, and read the text. I don't think they'd be bored, but they'd be dealing with a lot of complex ideas. I see Donna's got a question here about text-dependent questions.
Yeah, this question really touches my heart, because when I went to the CCRS training in Phoenix, I had the same question and it really bothered me. And it's, do we really have to stop asking non-text dependent questions, such as what's your opinion or what do you think? And I realized that, no, we don't have to stop doing that. But we have to give students time to understand the topic well enough to talk about it. And let me give you an example of small talk. You can put a visual up for pre-reading of people talking in the workplace or around the cafeteria at school, and ask students, what do you see? And they can talk about that. But when you start asking things like, well, is this okay in your culture? What do you do? And they might, you know, there's some cultures they might not know what to say about that. They don't have the background knowledge yet. So if we give them the text to read and 2 maybe opposing viewpoints, they'll have something to say about it. They'll have an opinion based on something they've read. And again, this is that leveling the playing field where everybody has something to say because they have the background knowledge.
Thank you, Donna. I'm going to turn this for the final comments over to Melissa in New York. And hold with us just a minute. We're going to be changing the presenter, and we'll give Melissa a chance to give us some final comments. Only I have to do it, not, oh. Yes. Okay.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you so very much to Lynn, Donna, and Sylvia for sharing your deep knowledge on this subject. It sounds like people were getting a lot out of it, and I do encourage you to, I'm going to send a link next week. By the middle of the week, you'll receive it, to the webinar recording so that you can review any parts that were interesting to you. You'll also receive the handouts in case you didn't receive them via email today, or you registered a little bit close to the start time, you wouldn't have received them, as well as a certificate of attendance to all those who joined us here today. So if you have any further questions about the extended reading worksheets, I would encourage you to check them out yourself on the Cambridge website, which is cambridge.org/ventures for ventures specific material. And then I'll just show you this slide here. If you have any questions beyond that, please always feel free to contact your local sales representative. There's a phone number there as well as a web address, so you can locate your local sales representative if you have any further questions. Okay, well, I wish you a wonderful weekend, and thank you for spending your time with us. Bye-bye.